Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HBCU Center for Research, Leadership, and Policies Turning Pages Author Talk episode. We're really pleased to have you join us today and really looking forward to an exciting and engaging conversation. Today's topic is HBCU faculty brain drain, and we have three authors who've done some really exciting and compelling work around this topic that we're really interested in delving a little bit deeper into. And so really, again, look forward to the conversation. And let's begin with some introductions. And we'll start with Dr. Robert Palmer, and we'll move around to the other authors. Dr. Palmer?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Carter. My name is Dr. Robert Terry Palmer, and I am a full professor and department chair for educational leadership and policy studies. And my research is focused on HBCUs, minority serving institutions, Black men in higher education, retention and persistence, and racial and ethnic minorities in STEM.
Thank you.
Dr. Ni? Okay. Yeah, sure. I'm sorry.
Okay.
My name is Chaoqun Ni, and I am an assistant professor here at the I School of University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I do a lot of research in the space of scientific workforce development. I'm trying to understand who enters, participates, and thrive in the scientific workforce. So HBCU is a very special case that I'm super interested in knowing all the different kinds of challenges that the particular very special type of institution that's facing in this society. So, yeah.
All right, great. Welcome.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Erija Yan. I'm associate professor at Drexel University. Actually, Chaoqun and I, we graduated from the same program at Indiana University. Yeah, so we have been working on different projects, and my research area is in cytometrics, which is using scientific data to study how knowledge is created, disseminated, and transformed. Particularly, for this project, we're interested to know the academic mobility, how professors move from one institution to another, and what is the motivation behind that. So as Chaoqun mentioned, that we're very interested in analyzing HBCU because it's such a unique and cherished institution in American higher education, and it's facing some challenges through the establishment in the late 19th century. So particularly in the recent decades, it has some renewed attention from different sectors in society, but we want to bring some evidence-based results and outcomes to this much larger conversation centered with HBCU. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. And I think that is so important. I mean, oftentimes we have conversations around these issues, particularly the way that you all frame mobility, retention, and attrition, and identified a variety of so your findings sort of revealed some very interesting data points. I mean, and there are a few I'll mention as we move through. So certainly appreciate this work, and I do think it's certainly very important to have some data-driven conversations about what's happening in terms of mobility and retention and attrition, and what one might call either a brain drain or certainly some consideration of how faculty find an academic home and what that means. So this is great. Okay, so I'm going to begin with some general questions just to sort of get us started, and so let me begin by asking, what inspired you to write about this topic? I know Dr. Yan talked a little bit about the storied histories of HBCUs, et cetera, but what key experiences or other influences shaped your interest in the work? Now, I know Dr. Palmer is my chair, actually. He's chair of my department at Leadership and Policy Studies here at Howard University. And so certainly I know of his deep commitment and work in the HBCU context. But in terms of just generally speaking, from each of you, why this topic and what made it attractive to you?
Do you want to go ahead?
Are you me?
Yeah, Dr. Neal, you go
Okay.
ahead.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. I
Okay.
can do that. Sorry.
Sure. No problem.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, my work is generally in the space of understanding the scientific workforce. How can we develop and cultivate a competitive scientific workforce? And Erija and I have been working together for a long time on different projects. And when we start to look into different kinds of institutions, and I realized like there are some very important things like HBCUs have done to the country. For example, if I remember it correctly, more than 80% of Black judges were trained by HBCUs, and more than I think 90% of Black engineers were actually trained or graduated from HBCUs. So these are so important, but we also know from a lot of media, like news articles, knowing that HBCU has been facing challenges not only from the perspective like enrolling students, but also financially and a lot of stress and very under-resourced type of institutions. And we read through this and we're like, but like we know some high-level statistics. But we don't really know, we don't really have much data in terms of how the faculties are doing and how exactly they are under supported or how exactly HBC institutions are under resourced or underfunded, right? So we decided to do something, but of course we had to do something that we have our expertise aligned with. So that's why we chose to do the brain drain, looking at it from the faculty perspective, trying to understand how HBCUs are facing the challenges of faculty attrition. So that's how we started. And like I said, it's such an important type of institutions that society needs, and it's so important to all the Black students. So we want to do something. That's where we started with. But I'd like to, yeah. So that's just what, yeah, I have.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
Dr. Yan or Dr. Palmer, either want
Sure.
to comment? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'll go ahead. So echoing Chaoqun's comment, um, so in the research sphere of centrometrics, which is using scientific data to study scholarly communication, how researchers collaborate, how funding decisions are made, things in that nature. Primarily, research was done on what they call R1 institutions, right? So, which is research
Our research activity.
Yeah.
yes, high research activity. I think I know that Harvard just got R1 recognition, which is great. But for the longest time, there's a lot of studies. It seems to overgeneralize entire U.S. Higher education, but very little attention was paid to HBCUs and other, minority serving institutions. So we look up at the literature. It's really saturated with a lot of R1, other elite institutions, well funded, but very I think the last study that we could find to really study the academic mobility for HBC was 30, 40 years ago. So since then, nothing was done. But as we know, like in the past 30, 40 years, a lot of societal changes have taken place. And through anecdotal stories, we often hear that if a scholar is doing great at an HBCU, they're likely to be snatched by a PWI. And I know there's a lot of discussions and even controversials around this practice of snatching or like attracting faculty members at HBCUs to go to PWIs to fill their kind of quota of some kind, diversity quota. So I know there's a lot of controversies behind it, and where it's not our place to really kind of assess that kind of practice, but our goal is really using the data to see if that's really true, if the anecdotal stories is just like a few incidences or high profile incidences, or are they really like a common trend? That's what we're more interested in. So we want to, and we know that there's a lot of discussions. It's now past year or so. It's really through the establishment. There's a lot of discussions around the legal status, the economic status. through there's a pro and con. There's always that kind of camps around the status of HBCUs. But a lot of those discussions we realize that are now grounded in data, facts, right? So it's really driven somewhat by ideological standpoints or their own personal preferences. So we really want to be part of this conversation using data, right? So that's what we're good at. And then policymakers and higher education administrators, they can use our data to make more informed decisions. So that's really our motivation behind it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what attracted me to this study was really trying to understand more about the experiences of faculty in general at HBCUs, particularly Black faculty, and this notion around brain drain in terms of faculty who were leaving these institutions and trying to understand the impact that it had on students. There's not much research out there on faculty at HBCUs. Some of the research talks about white faculty, for example, but we don't really have a holistic understanding of some of the challenges and even the rewards that faculty at HBCUs experience, and trying to understand reasons that facilitate their attrition and also motivate their retention. I think really that was a critical aspect for me that really attracted me to the study. And interestingly, I've never met Erin and Chaoqun. They actually reached out to me via email. So, and they told me about the study. They were examining brain drain at HBCUs, particularly in terms of faculty and faculty placement. I was like, wow, this sounds interesting. And so we, worked on a grant, and it was funded, and and I think we've been able to do some great research that will hopefully inform policy and practice, and will spark more conversation about faculty at HBCUs.
Great, and it was a great choice. I'm glad they reached out to you. You're perfect person. Perfect
Sorry.
person.
Sorry, can I?
Oh,
Sorry,
sure.
can I interrupt for a bit? I just want to correct some of the numbers I just cited. I just don't want to lead our audience.
Mhm.
So I think there was 80% of Black judges that were trained by HBCUs, and 50% of the engineers, as well as 50% of Black doctors, they were trained by HBCU. So I want to correct quickly here, just in case. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. And I do. I mean, we often cite those statistics, and
Yeah.
I think that again, as I was saying, reaching out to Dr. Palmer, who has extensive experience in this area, and certainly is a faculty member at HBCU, and a whole bunch of other things that I'll raise in a minute. But one of the things one thing I want to say is that Howard recently reattained R1 status. It had R1 status, then lost it in 2008 and has reattained it. So Howard's the only institution that's had R1 status as an HBCU. And now, again, because we did lose it, we did not have it from 2008 through this recent announcement in February 2025. And so Howard, in many ways, has been a research institution, of course, for many, many years. But I mean, even though there's certainly R1 and R2 and so forth. And now, of course, with the latest release of the Carnegie classifications, we see they've expanded the research umbrella so that we have research one institutions, research two institutions, and then another category called research colleges and universities, which again I think is important. The other thing I'm thinking that you all mentioned is that I really like the way you've centered the faculty voices, because there isn't much research at all, as you've all indicated, on HBCU faculty. And one of the things the center is doing, our theme under our new strategic plan is HBCU research matters and HBCU researchers matter, because we really, really want to focus on HBCU researchers, those people at these institutions who may, in fact, in some ways be under-resourced in some ways, but in other ways have some rich resources, certainly amazing students, amazing institutions, amazing faculty. So there's much to learn from our researchers, but often don't have the platform or other kinds of constraints maybe hinder their ability to do this work. And so I really do appreciate this whole idea of this commitment to elevating or illuminating or amplifying, it's a better word, the HBCU faculty. There, there's one statement that you all make in one of the articles that I've read that I found extremely interesting, and will speak to I think the second question that I raised. And one the statement is, you all say that most HBCUs hire from R1 institutions, which in this instance would be PWI institutions, while PWI R1 institutions, while HBCU grads primarily find employment at institutions with lower research intensity. And I found it very interesting in terms of that data that HBCUs are actually hiring from Research One PWIs. Okay, and what do you make of that? I mean, certainly in the article that article that came, as well as the others, there's some conversation around that. But to me, that's a theme that certainly deserves some unpacking. And can you talk about that perhaps and share some other central themes or findings of your work and how you see those contributing to the broader higher education conversation?
Thank you for that question. I can start because we have multiple members on the project, and we each do different aspect, of the data, for hiring placement, for mobility, interview surveys, right? So the part you just mentioned about hiring and placement, I was part of that effort. Yeah, so you're absolutely right about the pattern, right? So I think the positive take from this is that HBCUs play such a pivotal role in the hiring and placement network of the entire U.S. higher education. If you see this as a network, institutions hire graduates from other institutions, and in the meantime, they place their own graduates to other institutions, right? So it's really a network. So we want this network to be resilient, to be sustainable, and also to be equitable, right? So, there's some larger studies looking at, all hundreds of institutions in the US. They also found similar results in that elite universities, their graduates can find employment, in a much wider collection of institutions, whereas other institutions usually find their own graduates, they have to find employment at lower tier institutions. So this downward pattern, downward mobility is not only unique to HBCUs. I think it's probably built in different aspects of society, higher education, in other job seeking kind of behaviors. So I think the positive part of it is, again, is that HBCUs play a very important role. It's really absorbing. If you think about it, like knowledge trade, absorbing the fresh knowledge, fresh blood from R1 PWIs, and so that can enrich their own knowledge generation engine. On the negative side is that graduates of HBCUs rarely find placement at the same top tier institutions. I would say Howard University being the exception, because there are many graduates from Howard finding employment at R1 PWIs. But the majority of R2 HBCUs, they definitely witness a downward mobility. So I would say that there are some barriers for HBCU graduates to find employment. But again, this is kind of a building societal structure, not so unique to HBCUs. It's really just a kind of human bias or human understanding of how status works. So more broadly, so our work tries to understand this institutional equality, not just in funding, but the mobility and career trajectories of faculty, right? So it really challenges the higher education folks to think more seriously about the environment, right? Because if this downward trend is not, I would say reverse, but at least kind of slow down, right? Or this would result in this kind of opening this kind of gap even more, right? So because we want our own graduates to also land good jobs, right? In the meantime, we recruit the best talents on the market, right? So I think that's more sustainable. But if we do not have that kind of pattern, right? So gradually, then the resources, like a vicious circle in a way, right? So the resources will be fewer and fewer, and then the reputation and the status would just kind of keep sinking in, right? So at least I think Howard definitely is an exception. So hopefully other HBCUs will also find its footing in this kind of a competitive job market. So to send their graduates to some top tier programs. So that's my take on this mobility part. If Chaoqun and Dr. Palmer want to also kind of provide their own insights, that'd be great too.
I think your response, I appreciate your response. And I do like the way you talked about this sort of thinking about the higher ed ecosystem as a hiring and placement network and what that means in terms of this idea of a downward mobility. Perhaps is and embedded in your response, Dr. Yan, I appreciate it. It is a critique of the larger academy because we have created these categories, some artificial, or not, and thinking that what's a top institution, what isn't, where should people who graduate from um, R1 schools go? I mean, look for employment or placement. I think it really does. I think it can um, trouble some of these traditional notions what about how we all perpetuate the hierarchy of higher education and then these institutions. And so that's and I did note certainly in your article that Howard is the exception in terms that many of the Howard University graduates will go to these R1 institutions. But I would like to, I would, I'm interested in learning what that means in terms of discipline. If that's true in education or political science or in the science and STEM fields, I mean, it'll be really interesting to unpack that. But I appreciate your response. I think you raised some important points there. Dr. Palmer, Dr. Nee, would you like to comment?
For me, my experience, particularly serving as a department chair and serving on several research committees, I've seen that to some extent where we tend to look at the research productivity. And certainly if folks are graduating and they have, particularly as a junior professor, they have more publications versus someone without those publications, and we're looking at the person's ability to be successful on a tenure track and who's going to hopefully gain tenure at the university. So I've kind of seen that play out. Conversely, also seen where we want, for example, folks who kind of graduated from the institution because we may know that person, we know the quality of their work, we know their potential. So I think there's a bit of nuance there that we must take into consideration.
Good point.
Yeah. I'd also like to echo some of the points that Erija and Robert have both mentioned. I think HBCUs hire a lot of faculty from WPIs to me, there are two major reasons. One is that their desire to have to diversify their faculty profile and to benefit from their diverse experience from faculty members or from their training experience as PWIs, which I think it's a great thing. But I also I'd like to echo what Robert has just mentioned, that it's the pursuit of research productivity and higher academic recognition during the hiring process of of most HBCU that played a role in what we're seeing here in this particular paper. But I also think that for the second reason, what's very important is that from some other studies we did in this project, we know that HBCUs are very, compared with PWIs, they have limited support for research. That's the common theme that we found from a couple of articles. So I think that has a lot to do with the results, with the competitiveness of HBCU PhD graduates. So if they have less support, they will not have the great or the best productivity and recognition, like academic recognition, like many other PWI graduates that we see as more competitive in job market. That's just my take from. I think it's just not a single element. It's everything that's a cycle that working together reinforce each other, disadvantage or advantage that result into what we are seeing here in this in all the studies that we do.
Yeah, okay. And I do agree that this issue of nuance is extremely important because, we've all had different experiences in terms of where we graduated from, the institutions we worked at, what's gone into the factor in terms of deciding, identifying other people. But part of this notion about people graduating from top tier institutions um, being, and I do think this issue of productivity and certainly now, I'm older, so now people graduate with publications and everything else way more than they did even 15, 20, let alone I can go for further years ago, but there's much more opportunities. And so this idea of making sure that people are acclimated to a culture of research, I think is important. But also, I think we have to be really honest about what these search committees are looking for. I've certainly been at Howard for 18 years. I was at Clark Atlanta 10 years before that. I graduated from PWI R1 and worked at other PWI institutions as though I'm sure others have. I know Dr. Palmer, because I know his background certainly has in those respects as well. And so there is a critique of higher ed culture, okay, in terms of selection of faculty and so forth. I think is very interesting because it's one thing when we talk about entry faculty, people who are new to faculty roles, versus this idea of folks, once they've been in the academy for a moment and then going on to an institution and so forth. So in terms of, I was very interested, I was very drawn to some of the comments that were made by various faculty members in various places. So I did appreciate the use of not only quantitative data, meaning actual statistics in terms of number of folks who are teaching and so forth at various institutions, but also hearing from their particular experiences. I thought was very really added some additional insight and nuance and complexity that oftentimes the data don't reveal. So how might institutions use this information, whether it be HBCUs or PWIs? Particularly, I think Dr. Yan may have mentioned early in terms of sort of notions about, recruiting Black academics or faculty members at some institutions that may want to diversify their faculty, and certainly HBCUs being able to be easy sources or available sources for people. But what might institutions, or even more so the institutions, faculty who are making decisions, city search committees about faculty, what might they learn from your research?
Dr. Carter, yeah, this is an excellent question, and I really appreciate your commentary about your experience working in the search committee and higher education administrator. So I think this really relates to a much broader discussion about what is valued in scholarship, right? So, Chaoqun and I study the impact, right? So it's really hard to sometimes define what is scholarly impact, right? So there's numerous indicators that we can rely on or adopt, but I think primarily they focus on research productivity, right, and citations. So I think there is a renewed attention, or I would say a different understanding these days to redefine what is scholarship, right? So it's not just about publishing papers. It's really about how you actually make a difference in society, right? So I can write dozens of papers, but in terms of numbers, that's great, right? But then they don't really make any difference in the conduct of others, the behaviors of others, or any difference in society. So I think uh, I think we should look at the resume or CV, when for hiring new faculty members, or is to look at not just the the quantifiable numbers of citations and publications, but also the substance, right? So, but I think there are different reasons people, search committee folks do not or tend to just look at the numbers. It's because they are easy, right? They're expedient, they're practical, versus looking at really the substance of papers we have, because you have to read them first, right? And then somehow using your domain knowledge to interpret the results, right? So that's why I think the common kind of misalignment in the hiring process is that people emphasize more on the numbers over the quality, right? And I think this is particularly, so that probably is true in search committees across the nation, but I think this is particularly true for HBCUs, because HBCU graduates may pursue a line of work that is, let's say, riskier but more rewarding, or that is understudied, but again, it's more impactful. So looking at numbers, it may now stand out, right? But looking at the substance, they really make a difference, right? So, but using the screening process or the hiring process these days, that they may not stand out to be the best talents, but that's why we have to rethink about what is really good scholarship, right? So instead of just looking at numbers, but let's look at the substance. Let's look at the content and how rewarding their topics are, right? So I think in that way, HBCU graduates may stand out to be the leaders, to be the potential kind of talents in their field, right? So, but that's a much larger discussion. I think the higher education, folks need to adapt to, right? So because for the longest time, we only look at the numbers, but numbers themselves do not really cover the entire picture. Yeah.
Can I,
Good points. Dr. Palmer, yes, please.
yeah, I want to say something and perhaps introduce a different perspective, because I agree that we should look at substance, and substance should matter. The reality is that numbers matter, and not just number, or not just placement in terms of academic publication. It's actually where you publish. That's a reality, and so I think we have to prepare students for that reality, right? So that means that as graduate programs, we have to encourage students to publish. We have to encourage students to work with faculty. We have to encourage students to go to conferences, for example.
Mhm.
We have to encourage students to write. And that's something that I actually do, that we actually do as faculty in the PhD program of higher education. We encourage students to engage in those activities because, quite frankly, numbers matter. I've sat on many committees, from committees for selecting folks for different awards, or even evaluating folks for tenure promotion, all the way up to full professor. And so we look at, unfortunately, we do look at the numbers, right? And not just the numbers per se, because you can have 100 publications, but the question is, where have you published, right? Are they in well-regarded outlets? I mean, this is a reality that again, I think substance should matter, but we have to talk about reality, and we have to prepare students for that reality, and have students be competitive to engage in that reality. We can't talk about what should be, because that just frankly doesn't translate well to practice.
I agree with that in part. I do think that we have to do both. I think we have to understand what the rules of the academy are if you want to
Mhm.
pursue a career in the academy. But at the same time, I do think that we have to also look at substance. And I don't think that you're not saying that, Dr. Palmer. And I think that our department does a great job in terms of preparing people for the research world that is. But I think we also have to prepare people to challenge the research world, or the not the research world necessarily, but the academy. We want people to do good work, quality work that is impactful, but also they'll be well received as scholars. And I think a part of my role in the HBCU Center is to say, what kind of systems or structures um, do we want to encourage? Now, again, recognizing, I agree, that we have a system right now that is self-perpetuating, that we all participate in and we've all benefited from, frankly. But at the same time, we have to understand ways in which we can engage the system in ways that would benefit others. And this is really important, a question or conversation, because right now we talked about brain drain from HBCUs, but actually right now we have a brain drain of Black academics or people who study riskier topics to HBCUs. So we have people who have been often prepared at these Research One institutions who've taught at them, who are now being absolutely trying to find academic homes where they can do their work because of the political environment right now. The institutions are saying, particularly, well, we don't have to go through a list of what's happening, but we know what's happening. And we have people who are seeking HBCUs as perhaps a safe space, though HBCUs are public, private, are all the kinds of things that every other institution is. So when we're in these kind of situations, we got to figure out where can we do our work and be safe? Where will our work be appreciated? And that's not to say that all people who are HBCU graduates study HBCUs or topics at this particular moment are politically charged and so forth, but are surveilled. But I think those are important questions. While I definitely agree that numbers matter, because in the academy, that's what we do. But we do that for a reason, because that is what the academy is built on, and that's what we've learned, and we perpetuate that same notion. But at the same time, while making sure that our students are competitive if they want to pursue this area of work, we also have to give them perspective that will perhaps expand
Mhm.
that notion and understand that though we've said this is the case, it doesn't have to be, and it's not always the same for everybody. Okay, I've been around long enough to know that numbers matter in some cases, right? For some folks have been able to acquire all kinds of positions and ranks and everything else where the numbers didn't matter. So there are some nuances and complexities. I think that we have to certainly understand that our feet are so we're sort of in both spaces. So I appreciate all of your comments around it, because I think it's important for us to sort of consider and really sort of reflect. Basically, really, because of what you share here in your work, I think I've just was not, I can't say I was surprised, because I've lived this world for nearly 30 years, but I do think that amplifying these voices and disseminating this information with these perspectives, I think is extremely, extremely important. So I want to applaud you on that. Um, so if there anything in particular that you think in terms of particularly the voices from the faculty members, because you interviewed not only faculty members at HBCUs but also at PWIs, and so are there any were there any comments or perspectives or reflections that you think we really should spend some time discussing or really sort of thinking about in this space that we're in right now?
Dr. Can I just piggyback on what you said about, I mean,
Sure.
not to perpetuate the notion about the numbers, but I think and obviously substance matters that
Oh yeah.
um, but what I've learned, certainly being a Black man in the academy or a minoritized person, that we have to have more than,
Mhm.
the average person to be successful, right? So we have to have more publications than our white colleagues to be successful. So when we talk about numbers and placement, those things are important, particularly because of the racism that we as Black people and minoritized folks face. So when I talk about numbers being important. I'm coming from that perspective, knowing that unfortunately we have to work twice as hard to get to where people who, quite frankly, are less qualified to get to. So,
I don't disagree with you on that. And I do think that your point's well taken. And I think what it does, this, let me say, period. And I think what it does, as you're saying, Dr. Palmer, is a Black man in the academy, having worked at the PWI, HBCUs, and been extremely successful, uh, uh, prolific author. I mean, done some great research and so forth. I think your point's well taken because often that should, in fact, when that happens, take those other issues off of the table. Because in fact, if we have to do more, if in fact, in order even to sometimes even be considered, those things have to be in place, where that's not true for other people. So I definitely understand and agree with your points there. Absolutely. I also think that we have to challenge that in terms of, because we do know, just as you said, because of racism and other kinds of things, that's not the case for everyone. And so, we often, as we know, have a mantra: you got to work twice as hard, no matter what. But we should, even though we do that, and we have to, that's a part of our experience. We have to be explicit about that to people who we are mentoring, supporting, and because to not do so is unfair. I agree. To not do so is unfair. It is operating with blinders on. At the same time, we can also encourage others who've done like yourself to envision a different academy, so that as we have these conversations, and we can't have the conversations, we're at the table, and we're at the table because of these numbers often. Again, I don't minimize the numbers, because I do think there's something to be said, to say the least, about that, to say the least. But at the same time, I think we have to, if we want to have an expansive academy, have the both end conversation. So I definitely agree with that. And I think particularly as um, I remember I graduated from Ohio State, and when decades ago, and someone said to me about someone who was going to an HBCU. Oh, well, he went to a lesser institution, and they didn't realize I was there. Okay. And they're like, oh, and I found that very interesting. One, because I've never thought about, that never occurred to me. Okay, frankly, and even though I attended a whole range of institutions and worked at them, until it really, but it showed me the depth of that, and that was nearly 30 years ago when that comment was made to me. So again, that is real. Okay, the issue of when we're going to stop defining not just HBCUs but other similarly situated institutions. Often in our R1 sphere, we think these are the only institutions where you can work and build a career. And that's not necessarily true. Okay, at these institutions, there are things that matters, as Dr. Palmer and others are stating. You got to have publications. You have to have these other kind of things. You have to be a part of these networks that help to support and engage, because that's how we keep this going. Okay, we can't keep this going if we don't have these networks. We don't have these publications. We haven't identified which ones are superior to others and so forth. There is a whole culture of HBC of higher education, the ecosystem that we're a part of. So we can't be a part of it and deny its existence, because that again would be setting us up for failure. So I definitely agree with all that. But any comments in particular from faculty members that you think would help us in this conversation today?
If I may,
Sure.
one of the things I would add in terms of comments from faculty, understanding the reasons why faculty chose to remain at HBCUs. Some faculty, and not just Black faculty, but faculty in general, talk about the passion they have for giving back, for making a difference in the lives of Black and Brown students. That was really powerful. That was really profound. And some participants talked about how their early exposure to HBCUs as a kid really transformed their desire and motivated them to work at HBCU. So you see that commitment was really powerful. That commitment to be of service, that commitment to make a difference, that commitment to empower the next generation of Black and Brown folks. I think that was really powerful. And that's something that we don't really talk about enough. We kind of talk about some of the challenges to some extent, but we don't really talk about the rewards per se.
And there was one comment in particular where someone talked about they work, it was a faculty member at a PWI, and talked about how he was able to build a research portfolio, do the things he wanted to do. But what he got into the field because he wanted to prepare people for, I think, some science field, and he wasn't able to do that there. And so he was looking to return to an HBCU so he could do that. I thought comments like that, just like the one you just made, Dr. Palmer, were peppered throughout some of the articles I read that I thought were extremely powerful. Dr. Nee, I think you were going to say something. I didn't want to.
Yeah, I would also like to, because I also participated in the survey study, which is related to what Dr. Palmer has done in the in-depth interviews. So I
Mhm.
think I mean I just want to take it from there that the sense of mission to me can be a very powerful retention tool for faculty if it's supported with robust research infrastructure and professional development opportunities. Because this is commonly seen not just in those interviews, but also in a large scale survey that we did. We saw a lot of comments coming in that the reason why I won't be remain in HBCU or I want to return to HBCU is because I feel that I am important to, I have a desire, or I feel important. It's my mission to train, to mentor the next generation. And that's super important. And I think it's like Dr. Palmer said, it's underspoken and it needs to be discussed further as a very important mechanism of faculty retention tool. Combined with all the other things, because in the related studies, we also found that there are many different reasons why people chose to leave HBCUs, and among them were the limited research support and professional development opportunities. So if we can combine all those things together and we have a targeted research agenda for faculty retention at HBCUs, I think that will be huge, huge for the development of HBCUs. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think on a personal level, before really getting before working on this project, I have a working knowledge of HBCU. But really, I think when I work with Dr. Palmer and other collaborators, I really have a very my understanding has been deepened and made me appreciate and know the history and contributions, the mission, right? So it's so unique. I think the general society, sometimes when I talk with my academic colleagues, they have to, again, they have a working knowledge, but they don't really know enough, right? So I think that is really for the professionals, right? So I think if we look at the much broader general public, they may not even know why we need HBC or what the history behind it and why it is unique, the mission and the vibrancy, and so I think that's why there is a bias, right? Let's be transparent about it. There's a bias. There's a prejudice, right? So some people may not see HBCU as the first choice when they find a job or when they enroll as a student, right? So I think marketing probably is essential here because without it, the misperception, the prejudices will still persist, right? I think that could be a barrier for recruiting students and faculty. And second, I think it's not just about whether a faculty member is productive, right? It is really whether the environment allows them to be, right? So when we talk about numbers, we have to think about the resources they have, right? So if you don't really have any travel funding, don't really have any research assistantship, right? So it's really hard to expect, to do things without much there in the first place. And I think we've talked about oh yeah, they're underfunded. There's no career development opportunities. I think those are very hard to address, right? So they're funding structure, right? So that's, I think it's paramount, right? So without changing that, we cannot just suddenly get everyone like a course release, right? But there are few ways. Dr. Palmer mentioned about sending students to conferences, right? I think that is a low effort but high yield type of adventure, right? So I think again, looking myself, and probably I can also talk to Chaoqun because we're very close in that regard. We benefit a lot from traveling to conferences, international conferences, while still at the doctoral program, right? So went to different countries, meeting scholars, and some of them are still, working with us, till today, right? So I think that is really, I wouldn't say like decisive, but it really play a very important role in our career, right? In our career path,
Absolutely.
career development. But to the department from Indiana University, it's really just $1,000, $2,000, right? So, but that seed money really flourished, right? So, there we can talk about like big policy implications or interventions, but which may take a while to implement, right? But I think at least if we can pitch the department at HBCUs to provide some kind of funding support for students to present their work, to get their network established. I think that in the short term could be a very quick way of supporting the students and allowing them to be in the same playing field with other kind of graduates from Pidal Lives, because then they now have a much enriched experience at the conferences and their own network. So that's something probably I could recommend in the short term, right?
I love that, actually. Low effort, high yield. I think that's extremely powerful, Dr. Yan. I really appreciate that comment because I think that's very important. I also think that when we think about HBCUs, even though I do think that we are in many ways unique and distinctive institutions, but there are many institutions that are similarly situated that are not HBCUs. So just like, I won't name any, but I mean, who are great institutions that are still maybe R2 institutions, may not be research universities at all, that are also, so HBCUs aren't the only places that are low resources and that kind of thing. But I think if we want to really build this sort of a research agenda, research a scholar who is producing research and so forth. I do think those kinds of things that you all talked about in terms of making sure there's a research infrastructure, there's research support, that there's the place where you can be. Who said that? I love that. The place where you can be successful. I mean, I think is extremely important, and identifying those ways, certainly, like as you mentioned, some of the larger policy implications, yes, but those sort of low effort, high yield, building a culture where people go to conferences. One of the things I think we've done in our higher ed and leadership uh, policy studies program, and Dr. Palmer, of course, is chair, again, just building into the culture, just like I did at Ohio State, that you go to ARA every day, every year, you submit proposals, you're part of UCA and ASH and et cetera. And so I think creating spaces to make sure that that we are engaged or immersed in the culture that supports these things, right? Because these things are not they're not created outside of this culture; they're embedded in it. And to the extent to which you have access and you have networks and support, means it's much more likely for you to build these kind of careers, and that you will come back, which is I think about this whole that's why I think this comment about who we hired is so compelling. And again, I've been in the HBCU for now almost many years, over 25 years, and worked at Ohio State for 10 years prior. My point though is that even in terms of our discussions about who we select and why is extremely important, because we do certainly look at numbers, certainly on many committees with Dr. Palmer, but we also look at where you attended. Because again, this idea of network, oh, they studied under this person, the academic lineage means something. Okay.
Mhm.
And so, even in terms of thinking about that, in terms of how can we support students who are very much um, have the potential to be great scholars. That's why I think this issue of publishing before is extremely important, because you have evidence of that. Okay, so I don't care if you came from an institution that's not highly regarded. You have a history of publications, then there's clearly some. I can write this. This candidate clearly has is on his way to establishing a strong research agenda based upon. So all those things are important. So I really do appreciate your comments in that regard and your discussion about some of those issues that are legit. I mean, certainly they mentioned them, so they're legitimate issues in terms of how can we make sure that folks can be successful where they are, so that this issue of attrition and retention, and certainly mobility, whether that be away from HBCUs or toward them, happens. How can we support faculty who want, whoever they are, who want to be successful at HBCUs and make sure they're doing that? So this is really important work that is really one of the things that, again, I mentioned earlier, we want to do in the HBCU center is elevate the voices of faculty at HBCUs. And I think this work really, really provides us with opportunities to do that. And so I want to ask each of you to provide some closing remarks or perspectives or anything you'd like to share with us about this work, and maybe even perhaps what you intend on doing in future work. And so I'll begin with Dr. Yan, then I'll move to Dr. Ni, and we'll close with Dr. Palmer.
Yep. So I think we will talk a lot. We've talked a lot about the project, but I also want to talk about like how important it is to work on something that I'm passionate about, right? So I think this alignment with my research background and interest with the right topic and with the terrific team, right? So I think earlier I talked about how we reached out to Dr. Palmer, and he's just so pleasant. He's like, oh yeah, I'm so interested. Let's work on it. And he's such a collegial and and also very very like through him I really get a lot of knowledge, right? So I think that this kind of connection is so essential to the success of the project, right? So and also I hope that we can continue this collaboration. There's so many things, and I know Dr. Palmer is also interested in the student success, which we could be working on in our next project, through funding or through not funding. I think it's just now we have a great team, right? So I think this is really really exciting to find the right people to work with, and I think that's really 50% of the project is finding the right people, right? So I'm so glad that I have found out Dr. Palmer as my long-term collaborator. Thank you.
Wonderful, great. Dr. Ni?
Yeah, sure. So I want to reflect something from from all the findings of this particular project. I would say that some of the things that we are seeing, we're observing as a trend happening at HBCUs, I think it is not inevitable to me, right? Despite all the challenges we discussed for the HBCU PhD graduates or for the faculty, all the challenges. But I think we know that there is a cause for hope. Our research found some of the faculty, at least many of the faculty, are now deliberately trying to coming back to HBCUs, motivated by a desire to mentor the next generation and contributing to institutions that shaped their own careers. They choose to come back, right? So this sense of mission, like I said, is very important, can be a very important tool for faculty retention if it can be paired with good research infrastructure support and professional development opportunities. But what I want to say is that HBCUs, they are not just institutions. To me, they are incubators of Black excellence, innovation, and leadership. So to me, I think faculty, they are central to the missions for what HBCUs have been doing. And if we are serious about ensuring educational equity and preserve those vital institutions, I think we must prioritize a lot of policies that would enable HBCUs to recruit, to retain, and to support their faculty. So the data that we collected, we analyzed are clear, either quantitative or qualitative data. And I think some of the solutions we discussed about or we proposed in our articles, they are within reach. They are not up in the air. They're totally within reach. So the question is whether higher education leaders and in many different spaces, different stakeholders as well, and they have the collective will to do that or to act upon what the evidence we've found. So that is what I'm thinking after all the projects. Yeah,
it's about the will to do it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well done. All right, Dr. Palmer.
Yeah, I just want to kind of harp on one thing just quickly. When I reflect about on the participants' voices, we have to be mindful about the stability or instability of leadership at HBCUs. For example, there were some of the participants, faculty participants, who talked about changes at the department chair level. And that was important because when they were recruited, they were told they would be teaching one or two courses, but then before they started, just maybe a week or two before they were actually going to start at the institution, that department chair had left, or there were some changes. A new department chair was installed, or put in place, and that department chair increased their load from 2 to 3, for example, or changed their course, the course they would be teaching at the last minute. And faculty cited that as a source of frustration. And that ultimately, played into one of the factors that really motivated them or propelled them to leave. So I think we have to really think about the stability of leadership that we don't really talk about. Oftentimes, when we talk about leadership stability or instability, we talk about it from maybe the presidential level at HBCUs, but we have to be mindful of other layers of leadership, number one. Number two, I think it's been a joy working on this study, working with such fantastic collaborators who are very passionate about HBCUs. It's been nice to produce research where we're actually making inroads on a topic that's not studied very often. From my experience, oftentimes we publish for the sake of publishing, and sometimes we publish the same thing. But it's been nice doing research that's really impactful and meaningful, and hopefully will have a fruitful impact on making a difference on faculty at HBCUs, and encourage more scholars to study the experiences of faculty at HBCUs. And lastly, I want to say too, we have to be more intentional to really pay attention to the experiences of faculty as more HBCUs become R1 institutions, right? Because when you are R1, the emphasis for faculty is really focused on research. So what does that mean for the relationships that students have with professors? And we know that those relationships are vital. They're so important. They're so important. So I wonder how that relationships that faculty have with students will be tarnished as faculty are pushed to publish more and focus on research. And that may leave less time to build those really nurturing relationships.
That's an important conversation, one we've been having for some time, because this ideal, I've been talking about this race to R1, but I do think there's some advantages certainly to being an R1 institution. That's not the necessarily goal for every institution, whether it be an HBCU or not. And there are implications. In many ways, there's some certainly positive, but there are also some ways that we have to think about what does that mean for an HBCU who values relationship with students. This whole issue of student success, as you know, I've been laboring in that field for many years. This issue of what does that really look like? What does a relationship between a student and a faculty member look like at a research institution versus a teaching and learning? And are they sort of diametrically opposed? I mean, can there be some blending, and what does that look like? But I think your issue in terms of leadership, expectations of faculty, all those things are extremely important. And again, and I don't say this lightly, when I really tried to, I'm intending to focus on faculty at HBCUs. There's so little research about it. And so the work that you've done, when I first accessed your papers, your articles, I was really amazed at the richness of the data and some of the findings and the themes that came through, because again, it's so incredibly important to have these conversations. And that leadership thing, though, we didn't talk about it today very much, I think was extremely important. As you said, Dr. Palmer, not only at the presidential level, but certainly at the academic department level and otherwise, but also leadership and understanding how important it is to have these structures and systems and supports in place at the institution to make sure that researchers can be successful where they are. And again, otherwise, they will find perhaps other places where they can be successful, or they'll create spaces that are not aligned with the institution or who they are, because they have to figure this out, or they know work-life balance and other kind of things. Or, I mean, there are all kinds of things, and we want to make sure that people are making decisions that are intellectually healthy, are healthy for students, excuse me, and healthy otherwise. So again, really, really appreciate this conversation. Look forward. My window's open right here, so the allergies are getting to me. But again, very much enjoy this conversation. Look forward to more important work that you'll be doing together, and certainly look forward to featuring you, if not certainly on Turning Pages, but certainly in some of our other programming at the HBC Center. So again, thanks everyone for joining us, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.